Isabella Hartwell had it all, or so it seemed. Designer clothes, a penthouse view, a fashion empire. And exactly 90 days before she lost everything, standing at her window 20 floors above the glittering city lights, she was planning the perfect excuse to bail on a blind date she absolutely did not want to go on. Because honestly, small talk with a stranger was the last thing she needed when her company was 3 months from total collapse. Meanwhile, across town, Deshawn Washington, a single dad mechanic raising his 6-year-old daughter alone, was having the exact same thought. Except his daughter Zoe was literally blocking the door, refusing to let him cancel. Neither of them knew that fate was about to intervene in the most unexpected way. A broken down car, a snowy Christmas Eve, a chance encounter that was anything but chance. What starts as the worst night of their lives becomes the beginning of something extraordinary. But when Isabella discovers that saving her company means destroying Deshawn's family business, the legacy his late wife died protecting, she is forced to make an impossible choice: her dream or his heart. This isn't just another love story. It's about second chances, blended families, and what happens when two people brave enough to take a risk discover that sometimes the detours in life lead exactly where you were meant to be. Isabella Hartwell positioned herself before the floor-to-ceiling windows of a Florida high-rise, gazing down at the urban lights twinkling 20 floors beneath her, genuinely considering the possibility of pretending to have food poisoning so she could escape this upcoming date. After all, sitting face-to-face with some unknown person exchanging pleasantries was absolutely the last thing she wanted to do when her entire business empire stood just 3 months away from total collapse. Her mobile device vibrated yet again, with another message from the investment group, and she felt the urge to hurl the expensive gadget straight through the window, except it had cost her $800 and financial ruin was approaching fast. Making poor monetary choices right now seemed particularly unwise. Her closest friend Rachel exploded into the apartment without bothering to knock, which was entirely characteristic of Rachel's personality. She took a single glance at Isabella's expression and responded with a headshake reminiscent of a parent showing disappointment. "Absolutely not, you're not going to cancel. I can read it clearly on your face." Isabella pivoted in her designer outfit that carried a price tag exceeding what most individuals paid for monthly housing and attempted to appear completely guileless. "I have no idea what you're referring to. I'm absolutely planning to attend." Rachel folded her arms across her chest. "You've devoted yourself exclusively to that business for 2 consecutive years. This evening is necessary. You need to recall what existing as an actual person feels like rather than functioning as some corporate executive automaton." "My business is collapsing," Isabella stated, and vocalizing those words made the situation feel devastatingly authentic. "The investment group demands a response by the 15th of January. We must pursue expansion or they'll withdraw every single dollar, and I have 200 staff members who will find themselves unemployed if I make the wrong decision." Rachel approached and grasped both of Isabella's shoulders firmly. "That's precisely the reason you require one evening where you're not obsessing over financial statements and marketplace forecasts. A single date. If he turns out terrible, you'll never have to encounter him again. If he proves wonderful, perhaps something positive finally enters your existence." On the opposite side of town, inside a cramped living space situated above an automotive repair facility that carried the combined scent of engine lubricant and holiday baked goods, Deshawn Washington found himself engaged in an identical discussion, except his sister, Tanya, was participating via video call and his 6-year-old daughter, Zoe, had physically positioned herself as a human barricade against the exit. "Father, you made a commitment to Tanya that you'd attend. Members of the Washington family don't violate their promises," Zoe announced with her hands planted on her hips, channeling her best impression of a miniature military commander, her natural spiral curls bouncing with each emphatic head movement. And Deshawn had to suppress a smile because her mannerisms were identical to how her mother used to behave when being obstinate about something. "I'm aware I made that commitment. Pumpkin pretending really seems like a poor decision." Deshawn adjusted his necktie for the 5th consecutive time, the sole necktie in his possession because he practically never wore such formal attire, and it created the sensation of being He ran his palm across his closely trimmed haircut, a nervous mannerism he'd maintained since his high school years. Tanya's voice projected through the phone's speaker system. "Deshawn, you haven't participated in a romantic outing in 4 complete years. Zoe desires your happiness, and I've already informed this woman of your attendance, so you're definitely going." Zoe bounced energetically, her small braids adorned with vibrant beads creating clicking sounds as they collided. "And I assisted Aunt Tanya with the selection process. She's extremely attractive and she appreciates fashion exactly like I do." Deshawn's head turned sharply toward the phone display. "Hold on, you permitted a 6-year-old child to participate in selecting my romantic companion." Tanya demonstrated mild guilt in her expression. "She viewed the profile and declared you'd find her appealing. And truthfully, Zoe possesses superior judgment compared to your own." Deshawn exhaled in frustration because attempting to argue with both of them resembled arguing with solid masonry. He retrieved his jacket and moved toward the exit. "Acceptable, one date. But when this becomes a catastrophe, I'm holding both of you accountable. 20 minutes following that conversation, Isabella's automobile produced a sound that no properly functioning vehicle should ever emit. Something comparable to a feline in distress combined with a kitchen disposal unit, and then completely ceased operating right there on a darkened road 3 miles distant from the cafe. She remained seated in her elevated heels and designer outerwear, observing snow beginning to descend from the sky, contemplating how this was obviously the universe communicating that she should return home, except her mobile device displayed 7:05 and she'd already arrived late. And Rachel would absolutely never cease reminding her if she abandoned the plan at this point. She contacted the roadside assistance service and received the delightful information that they maintained a 2-hour waiting period, because evidently every person's vehicle had decided to malfunction on Christmas Eve. She sent Rachel a text message suggesting this was divine intervention, and received a response in capital letters stating, "Absolutely not, summon a ride-sharing service. Don't you dare cancel." Isabella prepared to do precisely that when headlights materialized behind her vehicle and an aged pickup truck positioned itself nearby. And her initial reaction was, this scenario resembles the opening of horror film's Solitary Woman on Isolate Road. However, a gentleman emerged from the truck and his appearance seemed reasonably normal, perhaps mid-30s in age, pleasant facial features, and he approached with his hands clearly visible as though attempting to avoid frightening her. "Excuse me, ma'am, are you all right?" "Vehicle difficulties." His vocal tone was compassionate, somewhat unrefined with traces of southern hospitality, and Isabella felt herself becoming slightly less tense. "Correct, it simply stopped functioning. The assistance service indicates 2 hours. The gentleman nodded in acknowledgement. "Would you mind if I examine it? I work as a mechanic. I might be capable of providing assistance." Isabella blinked in surprise, because what were the statistical probabilities? She observed him open her hood and lean inward with a compact flashlight attached to his keyring, his brown hands navigating expertly throughout the engine compartment, with the assurance of someone who'd been performing this task throughout his entire existence. Within approximately 30 seconds, he'd identified the malfunction. "Your alternator has failed completely, but I can create a temporary repair sufficient to transport you to your destination." "Where are you attempting to reach?" "Pinewood Cafe, located on Maple Street," Isabella responded, checking her timepiece. 7:10 currently. Her hopes of creating a positive initial impression had evaporated. The mechanic straightened his posture and laughed, and the sound was so authentically genuine it surprised her. "You're joking." "That's my destination as well." What a remarkably small world. Isabella experienced something fluttering inside her chest cavity, but dismissed it because this was merely a kind stranger providing assistance. Nothing beyond that tanned. She definitely wasn't noticing that he possessed particularly attractive hands, or that his smile illuminated his entire face, or how the street lamp captured the warmth radiating from his dark eyes. He performed repairs on her automobile while snow continued falling, and she observed him, and they conversed about inconsequential topics. A simply effortless conversation that felt strangely comfortable for two complete strangers positioned beside a road. He mentioned having a daughter. She mentioned operating a business. Asterisk, neither of them exchanged names because it seemed unimportant during that moment. 15 minutes subsequently, her automobile was operational, and he was declining monetary compensation and expressing Merry Christmas, like individuals actually still did that anymore, and Isabella discovered herself wishing the vehicle had required slightly additional time for repairs. She followed his rear lights toward the cafe and positioned her vehicle in the parking area directly behind his, and they both exited simultaneously, and he maintained the door open for her like an authentic gentleman. The cafe radiated warmth and featured Christmas decorations, including lights and greenery and a small tree positioned in the corner, and the proprietor, Harper, approached carrying menus. "Deshawn Washington." The mechanic raised his hand in acknowledgement. "That would be me." Harper smiled warmly. "Your companion for the evening just arrived as well, Isabella Hartwell." And Isabella heard her own name vocalized and looked upward and observed the mechanic's face and watched him rotate and see her, and they both simply froze in place. "You're Deshawn." Isabella's voice emerged considerably higher than her normal tone. "You're Isabella." Deshawn sounded equally astonished. "The arranged date?" They vocalized it simultaneously and then both commenced laughing, because this was absolutely preposterous. They'd just invested 20 minutes together beside a road, and neither possessed any awareness they were approaching a meeting with each other. Harper was displaying a grin as though she'd orchestrated the entire situation. "Well, it appears you two have already eliminated the initial awkwardness. Your table is prepared whenever you're ready." They positioned themselves across from each other in a corner booth and simply stared briefly before Isabella shook her head in disbelief. "So you had no knowledge it was me when you stopped to assist?" Deshawn ran his hand across his head. That identical nervous gesture. "My sister didn't provide me with a photograph. Simply stated her name's Isabella and instructed me to be pleasant and not ruin things." Isabella laughed. "Rachel didn't show me anything whatsoever either. Simply stated, you were a quality father and I needed to attempt this. The absurdity of the situation impacted them both simultaneously. How they'd been traveling to the identical location, how his assistants had literally rescued their date from failure, and Deshawn leaned backward in the booth. So, should we commence again then? Isabella felt herself smiling for the first occasion all week, an authentic smile that wasn't manufactured for investors or employees. Hello, I'm Isabella. My automobile experienced a mechanical failure while traveling to an arranged date I had no desire to attend. Deshawn's grin matched her own. Hello, I'm Deshawn. I stopped to assist a stranger so I'd arrive late to an arranged date I similarly had no desire to attend. Harper materialized with a coffee container. May I begin your order? And Isabella and Deshawn both requested coffee at the precise same moment, looked at each other and commenced laughing again. And perhaps, just perhaps, this evening wasn't going to become a catastrophe after all. 2 hours vanished as though they were nothing whatsoever. And Isabella couldn't recall the most recent occasion she'd remained seated somewhere without examining her phone every 5 minutes or contemplating work obligations. But Deshawn possessed this ability of making everything else simply fade into insignificance. They conversed about everything and nothing. The variety of conversation that flows effortlessly when you're not attempting to impress someone, and she discovered herself laughing at his narratives about the absurd things individuals transported into his garage, believing they could be repaired with adhesive tape and wishful thinking. I had a gentleman last month transport in a transmission, maintained together with plastic ties and actual chewing gum, Deshawn stated, and Isabella nearly expelled her coffee. I apologize, chewing gum like the kind you masticate, Deshawn nodded with complete seriousness. Large red cinnamon variety. I could detect it from 10 feet distant. He looked directly at me and stated his acquaintance informed him it would function temporarily. Isabella was laughing with such intensity. Tears were developing. What did you communicate to him? Deshawn grinned. I informed him his acquaintance was foolish and sold him a rebuilt transmission at cost because I experienced sympathy for him. Isabella leaned backward in the booth, studying him carefully. You'll do that frequently, don't you? Assist individuals even when it financially costs you. Deshawn shrugged as though it wasn't significant. My father always stated, you can either possess wealth or you can sleep peacefully at night, and I'd prefer to sleep peacefully at night. He constructed that garage from absolute nothing, taught me everything regarding automobiles and regarding treating individuals properly. He stated, a black man's reputation is all he possesses, so you better make it significant. Something inside Isabella's chest performed this strange twisting sensation because she'd invested the previous 2 years, surrounded by individuals who'd sacrificed their grandmother for favorable quarterly returns, and here existed this gentleman who repaired transmissions at cost, and stopped 4 strangers during snowstorms and carried his father's wisdom like a badge of honor. What about your situation? Deshawn inquired, signaling Harper for additional coffee refills. What's the experience of operating a fashion business? Isabella felt her smile diminish slightly. Truthfully, presently, it resembles observing something you constructed with your bare hands gradually disintegrate and being incapable of preventing it. Deshawn's expression transformed authentic concern, replacing the effortless humor that severe. Isabella discovered herself communicating everything information she hadn't even shared with Rachel about the investors pressuring her relentlessly and the expansion deadline and the 200 individuals depending on her not to make catastrophic errors. We must pursue expansion by January 5th or they withdraw all financial support, Isabella stated, staring into her coffee cup as though it contained solutions. And the sole location that functions is this property on Market Street. But the timeline's extremely restrictive and I continuously contemplate what if I'm incapable of accomplishing it. Deshawn reached across the table and squeezed her hand firmly, and the physical contact was so unexpected and warm that Isabella looked upward. Listen, you're obviously brilliant and tough as hell. You'll determine a solution. His confidence in her abilities, this gentleman who'd known her for merely 3 hours, made her throat constrict. Harper transported a payment receipt and Deshawn retrieved it before Isabella could react. And when she protested, he simply smiled. You can handle the subsequent one. Isabella raised an eyebrow with curiosity. Fairly confident there's going to be a subsequent occasion. Deshawn's smile expanded. Well, certainly. I still owe you for the entertainment value of observing your facial expression when you realized I was your arranged companion. They walked outward into the parking area where snow was descending more heavily currently, covering everything in white coloration, and Isabella's automobile resembled a frosted dessert. That alternator's not going to survive the evening, Deshawn stated, examining her automobile with a mechanic's critical assessment. I can repair it properly tomorrow if you desire. The facility is closed for Christmas, but I'll be present anyway processing paperwork. Isabella hesitated because accepting felt like crossing some boundary from arranged date into something more authentic. I don't desire to ruin your Christmas celebration, Deshawn laughed. Trust me, my Christmas will consist of awakening me at 5 in the morning to open presents and then viewing Elf for the millionth occasion. Repairing your automobile would actually be a pleasant interruption, Mayamita. The words emerged before Isabella could prevent them, and Deshawn's expression shifted to surprise. Zoe, you desire to meet Zoe. Isabella felt her face heating. I mean, only if that's acceptable. You mentioned she appreciates fashion, and that's essentially my entire specialty. But if it's too premature or strange, simply forget I vocalized anything. Deshawn was smiling at her in this gentle manner that made her stomach flip. Tomorrow afternoon, approximately 2 o'clock. Fair warning, though she's going to completely lose her composure when she discovers who you are. The subsequent afternoon, Isabella positioned herself outside a door above Washington's garage, wearing denim pants and a sweater instead of her usual designer protective covering, gripping a bag of art material she'd purchased from an overpriced craft establishment, more nervous than she'd experienced for an investor meeting throughout her entire life. Deshawn opened the door and his entire face illuminated when he observed her, and then a tiny tornado wearing reindeer sleepwear came flying past him, vocalizing at a pitch only canine should be capable of hearing. Father, there's a princess at the entrance. Zoe's eyes were enormous behind her small eyeglasses, her braids, with pink and purple beads swinging wildly, her missing front tooth making her appear even more adorable. And Isabella commenced laughing. Not a princess, sweetheart. I'm Isabella. Zoe's jaw literally dropped downward. You're Isabella Hartwell from the magazine publication. Father, she's famous. She grasped Isabella's hand and dragged her inside before anyone could vocalize another word, and the apartment was compact but warm and decorated for Christmas with obvious care and attention, the variety of home that had love integrated into every corner. Isabella noticed photographs on the wall, family pictures, including one of a beautiful woman with warm brown skin and the identical bright smile as Zoe, who must have been Kessia. Zoe pulled out a shoebox overflowing with drawings, and Isabella positioned herself on the floor in her designer denim and examined each one, genuinely impressed, because this child possessed talent, authentic talent. The variety of eye for proportion and movement that couldn't be taught through instruction. These are incredible. Zoe, have you ever attempted draping fabric? Zoe shook her head in confusion, and Isabella grinned. Observe this. She retrieved a bedsheet and demonstrated to Zoe how to drape it across a chair to create different silhouettes, and within minutes they were both on the floor giggling and creating improvised fashion designs. Deshawn observed from the kitchen doorway with hot chocolate mugs in his hands and his heart, performing things it hadn't performed since death, because Isabella was positioned on his floor in $100 denim, teaching his daughter about fashion, design, and appearing more relaxed and happy than she'd appeared in any of the polished photographs he discovered when he searched for her online the previous night. You're talented with her, he stated, handing Isabella a mug covered in whipped cream. Isabella looked upward at him and smiled. She makes it effortless. They invested the afternoon like that, the three of them, and it felt strangely comfortable, as though they'd been doing this eternally. And when Zoe climbed into Isabella's lap to show her a particularly complicated dress sketch, Isabella felt something inside her chest crack open that she'd kept secured tightly for 2 years. Are you father's girlfriend? Zoe inquired with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer, and Isabella choked on her hot chocolate while Deshawn turned bright red. Zoe, we just encountered each other. You can't simply inquire about those things from people. Zoe looked between them with a brutal honesty. But you appreciate her. I can detect it too, smiled differently. Deshawn opened his mouth to deny it. But Isabella was laughing and Zoe continued speaking, and father needs someone pleasant because he's experienced sadness since mother died, but he pretends he hasn't. The room became quiet and Deshawn's expression shuddered, and Isabella realized they just crashed into territory considerably deeper than a second date usually ventured. I'm going to examine your automobile, Deshawn stated, his voice tight, and disappeared downstairs to the garage. Isabella could vocalize anything. Zoe looked worried. Did I make father sad? Isabella pulled her close. Negative, baby, you didn't. Your father just misses your mother tremendously. Zoe nodded as though this made complete sense. Aunt Tanya states that's the reason he needs someone new to love so he can experience happiness again. And Isabella's heart just absolutely shattered because this small girl understood excessively much. Zoe played with Isabella's bracelet, then stated casually, Father's worried about the garage. Isabella's attention sharpened. Why is that, sweetheart? Zoe shrugged her shoulders. Some fancy individuals desire to purchase our building. Father stated we might have to relocate. Isabella felt ice slide down her spine. What building? Zoe pointed downward. This one, Washington's garage. It's on Market Street, a little shopping plaza with a pizza establishment and a dry cleaning facility. Isabella's vision tunneled because she knew that property. Knew it intimately. Had the acquisition documents positioned on her desk with the address circled in red ink, and the building they desired to demolish to construct her flagship store was the garage directly below her feet, the garage Deshawn owned, the business he'd built, the legacy his father had started and he'd promised his dying wife he'd maintain alive, and she was the individual about to destroy it. Her phone vibrated with a text from Christopher, her business partner. Board meeting relocated to January 10th. Need final decision on Market Street property immediately? Isabella stared at the message and felt nauseated because the universe had just handed her an impossible choice: save her company and destroy the man she was falling for, or save Deshawn and observe everything she'd built for 10 years crumble into nothing. And there was no world where she obtained permission to have both. Isabella fabricated some excuse about a work emergency that sounded fake even to her own ears and practically ran out of Deshawn's apartment as though the building was on fire. And Zoe's confused little face inquiring, "But we were having so much enjoyment," was going to haunt her nightmares for weeks. She positioned herself in her automobile with her hands trembling on the steering wheel, pulled out her phone, and texted Christopher 3 words that felt like signing a death warrant. "We can't purchase it." Christopher called her immediately, his voice projecting through the speakers so loudly she had to reduce the volume. "What do you mean, we can't purchase it? That property is our sole option. The investors love the location. The timeline functions, Isabella. What the hell is occurring?" She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel. "The proprietor is someone I know. We can't do this to him." The silence on the opposite end was so heavy she could feel it crushing her chest. "You're destroying our company for a gentleman you've known for 48 hours. He's a single father. Christopher. The garage is his entire livelihood, his late wife's dream. His father built that business from the ground upward. I can't simply bulldoze it." Christopher's voice became cold in that manner. It did when he was about to vocalize something she didn't desire to hear. "And what about the 200 individuals who work for us? What about their livelihoods? You're going to look them in the eye and inform them they're unemployed because you caught feelings for some mechanic?" Isabella didn't possess an answer for that because he was correct and she hated it. She terminated the phone call and drove home, through snow that was descending so heavily she could barely observe the road. 3 days passed and Deshawn's text messages kept arriving, becoming more worried at each occasion. "Hey, haven't heard from you. Everything acceptable then? Zoe keeps inquiring when you're returning. No pressure intended. Just desired you to know. You're welcome here. Then finally, if I did something incorrect, I apologize. Would genuinely like to see you again." Each message felt like a knife twisting because she desired to respond so badly it physically hurt. But what was she supposed to communicate? "Sorry I ghosted you. My company desires to destroy your business and I'm choosing my career over you." On day 4, Tanya appeared at Isabella's office unannounced, and the receptionist looked terrified, attempting to stop her. But Tanya just walked right past as though she owned the place. "I'm Deshawn's sister and we need to converse." Isabella stood up from her desk, professional mask sliding into place. "I'm genuinely busy currently." Tanya positioned a folded piece of paper on the desk. Zoe desired me to give you this, and then I'm leaving. But you should know that Deshawn hasn't smiled once since Christmas Eve, and that little girl thinks she did something to frighten you away. Isabella unfolded the drawing with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, and it showed 3 people holding hands under a Christmas tree labeled in crayon with Father, me, and Isabella. And underneath, in Zoe's wobbly handwriting, "My Christmas wish, please don't leave us." Isabella's vision blurred, and she had to sit down because her legs just gave out, and Tanya's voice became softer. "I don't know what happened, but Deshawn hasn't been this happy in for years. And Zoe thinks you hung the moon. Just think about that." After Tanya's departure, Isabella sat there staring at the drawing and the property acquisition papers positioned side by side on her desk, and something clicked in her brain like puzzle pieces finally fitting together. She grasped her phone and called Christopher. "What if we don't demolish the garage?" Christopher sounded as though she'd suggested they commence selling products on the moon. "What are you talking about?" Isabella was already pulling up building plans on her computer. "What if we build around it? Mixed developments, maintain Washington's garage on the ground floor, position our flagship store on the upper levels." The silence on Christopher's end was different this occasion, thoughtful instead of angry. "That's actually somewhat brilliant. Blue collar meets high fashion. It's unique. Investors might eat that up." Isabella felt hope flicker in her chest for the first occasion in days. "And we partner with him as garage services our customers. Everyone wins." Christopher was already typing. She could hear the keyboard clicking. "Let me run the numbers. If this functions, Isabella, I'm giving you a raise and also admitting you were correct, which I hate doing." 2 days subsequently, Isabella walked into Pinewood Cafe and her heart nearly stopped because Deshawn was there with Zoe having hot chocolate. And the second Zoe spotted her, the child launched herself across the cafe, vocalizing Isabella's name. Isabella caught her and held on tightly while Zoe whispered, "I knew you'd return." And Deshawn stood up, looking guarded in a manner that made Isabella desire to cry because she'd done that. She'd made him construct those walls again. "Can we converse?" Isabella inquired, and Deshawn nodded, instructed Zoe to go sit with Harper for a minute, and they slid into the same booth where they'd had their first date that felt like a lifetime ago. Isabella pulled out a folder with trembling hands. "I owe you an explanation and an apology." Deshawn's jaw was tight. "Acceptable," Isabella took a breath. "My company desired to purchase your property at the garage. We were going to demolish it for a flagship store, and I didn't possess knowledge it was yours until Zoe mentioned the address." She observed Deshawn's face, experience approximately 17 emotions in 3 seconds, ending on something that resembled betrayal mixed with resignation. "So you just disappeared?" His voice was flat, and it hurt worse than if he'd yelled. "I was attempting to figure out how to save my company without destroying yours." Isabella slid the folder across the table. "Partnership proposal. We'll build around your garage. Mixed development. You'll remain on ground floor. We expand above 50-50 partners on the entire property." Deshawn opened the folder as though it might explode, read through the proposal with his mechanic's hands that she had observed repair her automobile, leaving smudges on the expensive paper. "You did this for me?" Isabella shook her head. "I did this for us all, 3 of us. You maintain the garage. Honor Kesha's memory. Your father's legacy. I saved my company. Zoe gets what she wished for." Deshawn looked upward, and his eyes were wet. "You're serious about this?" Isabella reached across the table and took his hand. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." 1 year subsequently, they were back in the same booth at Pinewood Cafe on Christmas night, and the mixed-use building was finished in gorgeous Washington's garage on the ground floor with Hartwell and Company. Flagship store gleaming above a tent. They'd been featured in 3 business magazines as the most innovative partnership of the year. Zoe was 7 currently and bouncing in her seat, her new braids with gold beads catching the Christmas lights. "This is where you guys met well the second time. The first time was when Mommy Isabella's car was broken." Deshawn corrected her gently. "Just Isabella, baby. Remember?" But Zoe shook her head stubbornly. She stated I could call her Mommy Isabella if I desired because she's going to marry you. Deshawn nearly choked on his coffee and looked at Isabella, who was attempting not to laugh. "Did you now?" Isabella shrugged innocently. "I may have mentioned that was a possibility." Harper brought over dessert with a candle in it, for my favorite family on the house. Deshawn pulled a small box out of his pocket and Zoe squealed because she already knew what was happening. They'd practiced this morning. "Isabella Hartwell, you saved my garage, saved my heart, and became the family Zoe wished for on Christmas Eve. Will you marry us?" Isabella was crying before he even finished, nodding so emphatically she probably appeared ridiculous. "Yes, sir. 1,000 times yes." The entire cafe erupted in applause because Harper had definitely informed every regular customer this was happening, and Zoe threw her arms around both of them. "Now I get a mother for every Christmas forever." 6 months subsequently, they stood in that same cafe for their wedding receptions, more imperfect, with just family and friends. And Zoe was the flower girl in a dress she designed herself with Isabella's help, her natural hair styled in beautiful twist-out curls with fresh flowers woven through. Deshawn pulled Isabella close for their first dance, while Zoe took approximately 8 million pictures on a disposable camera. "You know what's crazy?" Deshawn whispered against her hair. "What?" Isabella inquired. "If your automobile hadn't broken down, if I hadn't stopped, if we'd both just bailed on that arranged date like we desired to, none of this happens." Isabella looked upward at him and smiled. "Guess we should send a thank you card to that alternator." They laughed and continued dancing while snow started falling outside the cafe windows, and Zoe pressed her face against the glass, observing the flakes descending. "Mommy Isabella, Father, it's snowing just like the night you met." And Harper brought over champagne for the adults and sparkling cider for Zoe, raised her glass and stated what everyone was thinking. 2 broken down cars, arranged dates you don't desire to attend, and Christmas miracles that prove love finds you exactly when you stop looking for it. Sometimes the worst nights transform into the best stories. Sometimes a broken alternator is exactly what you need to find the person you're meant to spend your life with. And sometimes family finds you in the form of a mechanic who stops in a snowstorm and a little girl who wishes on Christmas magic. If this story reminded you that love shows up in unexpected ways, that partnership means lifting each other upward, and that happy endings are authentic if you're brave enough to fight for them, hit that subscribe button. Merry Christmas and thank you for being here with us.